Hello, Guitar Smarts fans. Before you check out this podcast, I want to make you aware of a cool new place where you can interact with other Guitar Smarts listeners. It's a Facebook group called the Guitar Geek Hangout. That's where we hang out and talk about all things guitar. So, if you like the Guitar Smarts podcast, come and chat with Kiran and myself over in the Guitar Geek Hangout on Facebook. Maybe check out some pre-podcast clips and even get involved in asking and answering lots of questions from the other page dwellers. Hope to see you there.
Because this pedal just does so much when you back off the guitar and in its touch sensitivity, and I'm blown away by it. And it costs a really reasonable amount of money. So stay listening, audience, if you want to find out what that pedal is and why I'm currently in love with it.
Greetings! Welcome to another Guitar Smarts podcast. This week, Kiran and I are discussing pedal boards, pedal board basics, how to build a pedal board, what the things to consider, and all the information we think you need to do and build your own pedal board for the first time. Or maybe you're an experienced guitarist and you've got a lot of pedals and you don't really know how to set everything up. Or maybe you're looking for some inspiration on what things to change, what things to experiment with and try out. We're talking about it all. Now, this one was a long conversation Kiran and I had. I think we spoke for about an hour and 40 minutes, so we've split this into two parts. Part one is this week, and we'll get on to part two next week, so keep your eye out for that one. As always, come and follow us on our social media pages. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Guitar Smarts, and also come and say hello on Instagram. Our handle there is at guitar_smarts. Come and give us a like. Remember to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and enjoy the show. Let's get to it. Hello, Kiran.
Hey, mate. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? How's your week been?
Yeah, it's been good. It's Easter now. It's Good Friday today in the UK, so no work today, which is brilliant. And kids are very excited about Easter, which is good. And with the new lockdown rules that we've got here, I'm actually able to within a childcare support bubble send my kids away for a couple of days to their grandparents for a sleepover. So I know. Man, it's been a long time.
Amazing.
So they're going to go, and they're so excited as well. They're going to have a few days with their grandparents who dote on them. I'm looking forward to a nice long weekend, a couple of days with the kids, and a couple of days without the kids, just to play some guitar and spend some time with the wife. Maybe have the first barbecue of the year. So my week has been busy thinking about what we're going to chat about today, which is pedal boards, which is brilliant. I think I've got some stuff to learn from you as well on this, because I still feel like I'm at the edge of a journey with this, and then looking forward to the weekend ahead of me. How about you, mate? How have you been this week?
Yeah, I've been good. I've had a busy week at work. It's always busy when we've got the Easter weekend because you're trying to get 5 days worth of work done in 4. But other than that, it's been really good. Looking forward to a nice, long, productive weekend. Doing DIY. My weekend. I
was going to say,
when you're renovating a house, you kind of it's always something to do. We've had the main bedroom plastered this week, so it's all the skirting and architrave and stuff like that this week. But I'll make some time for playing guitar. I always do, and geeking out on things as we do at home with our guitars, and always looking at what else I can have, which is pedals. It's always pedals, right? I'm always looking at pedals because for me, having a guitar seems like a really big choice, but pedals is pedals almost seem like a frivolous thing that you can kind of chop and change all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
So this week we are discussing pedal boards, which is, as I've just said, it's something that's constantly evolving and changing. If you're a guitarist or a working guitarist, you've probably gone through lots of different pedals, lots of different choices and sounds, and trying to, change and improve your sound using pedals. We wanted to discuss how you can make the most out of your pedals and your pedal board, what you can do to improve the setup that you have. If you're building your first board, what tips and tricks you should know about, and how you start building a pedal board, really. And we've kind of decided that there are some main areas for consideration, when you're building a pedal board. And we're going to approach it from that point of view of, if you're a first-time pedal board builder, maybe you've used some pedals for gigs, or you have a few pedals at home and you're sick of taking them apart and putting them together, maybe you should put them on a board and set up a single unit that has all your pedals on. So that's what we're going to talk about this week. So Kiran, you've probably had you've had a number of different pedal boards over the past.
I have, mate. I have, and I think this is the first time in my kind of gigging career and playing career where I've actually really got into a proper bespoke built pedal board. Nothing like uber fancy, there's still, stuff that I'm not doing with pedal boards, like, switching and all the kind of complex stuff that I could be doing. But I went through a history of, and I think a lot of people start like this with like multi-effects units and floor-based multi-effects units, because they're really cheap, they're really accessible, and they come loaded with like bags of different presets and customizable kind of banks that you can create your own tones from. So as a first kind of foray into guitar effects, I definitely think, even going back a couple of decades when the first kind of floor-based effects pedals started to come out from the likes of Zoom and kind of Boss and Art.
Korg.
I remember.
I had a Korg. Yeah, I had a Korg floor multi-effects unit, which was really cool. And I used that for years. I even used that when I was gigging, at some point. Yeah.
I did. I used like a Zoom, and I've still got it in the loft, just for more the kind of just the memories of gigging it, really.
Are you a hoarder? Are you a hoarder?
I'm not, as a general principle. No. I don't really like hoarding stuff. I kind of have in general, I have a philosophy like, if I haven't used it for 6 months to a year, I'd rather somebody else get some use out of it, or it gets recycled, or it gets sold or something. But there's certain things that have got sentimental value, which I'll keep hold of, right? So long as it's not taking up too much space. But I kind of force myself to get rid of stuff if I don't need it. But like anyone, some stuff I keep. And that Zoom 1010 that I bought when I was like 15 or 16, that served me for so many years for gigging and for some studio stuff with bands that I was in, through college and things. And I remember, being in a studio with it and an engineer going, "What is that? That sounds amazing. That sounds really great." I was like, "Well, it's like this little kind of floor-based multi-effects thing that came out, and it was 120 quid at the time." He was like, "That's amazing. Why would people, go and have like bespoke pedals and things when you've got like everything loaded into it?" So I think, and that technology has advanced over the years, and I went through the whole Line 6 phase, and now kind of dabbling with Spark amps and modeling in that regard. Still, I think there's an absolute place for it, and the technology keeps getting better and better. So I've gone through a lot of different effects options. A lot of it has been the modeling stuff and the floor-based units from those kind of manufacturers. But it was you that kind of got me really thinking about pedals and putting together I don't want to say the word proper pedal board, but a kind of a more bespoke pedal board that has some really distinct sounds in it. And I think there was some guitarists. Well, I think there was definitely guitarists I listened to at the time of building my first pedal board, where I was like, okay, that person plays that pedal to get that sound, and therefore I'm going to try and put together a pedal board, because we all want to sound like people that we admire.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's kind of my background with it, and I've put together what I think is a really decent gigging pedal board, but things go onto it and come off of it, and I think it's one of those lovely things where you can just keep customizing it and tweaking it, and satisfy your gear acquisition syndrome by buying another pedal here and there, because it's not too expensive unless you start playing in the real boutique kind of realms. So yeah, I'm kind of getting really into pedals and experimenting and enjoying finding inexpensive pedals that give really great sound. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. But you play around with a lot of this stuff and buy a lot of different things off eBay, and you always have this one in, one out philosophy. And I've seen you with loads of different pedal board configurations over the years. So
I've tried all kinds of different things. But as you say, I've always had this kind of one in, one out mentality. I try not to keep things too complicated, because in my mind, there's a number of issues that I find it harder to kind of control the sound of what I'm trying to achieve. If I've got too many options, I think that's just lack of time spent, with a board. Often, I haven't had the chance to really set things up at home. So if I'm going to a gig, I don't want to spend ages before the gig trying to get everything sounding right. I just want a simple system that sets up quite well. And also the way I play, I like having a lot of the sound from the amp itself, and then pedals is just kind of a bit of salt and pepper. Rather, some people like having, kind of a clean platform from their amp and using the pedals for the sound.
I'm that in that latter group. I love the sound of my amp. Yeah. And it's a really lovely pedal platform, and it's got a great clean channel sound that takes pedals really well. And then I shape my tone with different, stages of pedals. But I'd love to be liberated enough to just rely on the sound of the amp and play the amp with a couple of pedals here and there just to push things a little bit and rely on the guitar tone and volume knobs to also, be part of that whole interplay a little bit more. But I don't know, and I do that at home when I'm practicing and messing around. But when it comes to a gigging situation, I just like something more predictable and more kind of like, I think religable's not the right word, but it's kind of just, it's one less thing I have to worry about, right? Or think about too much. I've become very used to, and maybe this is over years of just having floor-based effects units and multi-effects units where I've become very accustomed to hitting a button at my feet and getting the tone that I need so that I can then think about what I'm playing rather than having to constantly dial in different sounds and things. But I'd love to get to that stage where I'm playing the amp.
Yeah, I think it's I'm not particularly great at it, but I like the fact that I guess it's kind of as you adjusting the volume on your guitar to get your clean sound rather than your dirty sound, or instead of pressing on a pedal. I kind of like the reason I like that is it kind of takes the step out of the sound change. You know what I mean? A part of it also comes from being a Clapton fan, who grew up listening to, the late 80s, early 90s Clapton, which were, this is only a few years after he's got that mid boost in his guitar. And I love the sound of him kind of, you can hear him winding that up as he's going into a solo. I like that kind of smooth transition between lead and rhythm and clean sounds. And likewise, sometimes when I listen to guitarists and you can literally hear them stomp on a pedal and you've just got this burst of sound. I'm not a big fan of that. So really, that's why I kind of like, playing in a way where you're affecting your sound more with the guitar than the pedals, and the pedals are there just for the extra bit of gain maybe that you need, or for a little bit of effect or time and space sounding effects. So I started off kind of just, when I first started gigging, I just had an amp and an overdrive pedal that was battery powered, and I just literally throw it on the floor for a gig. I think it was a Boss Blues Driver. And then as I wanted more stuff, I was kind of getting fed up of having this bag of things that you tip out on the floor at a gig and try and connect them all together. Have I got batteries for this? And then you start to realize that the board is something that you need to create a single unit. It's kind of like you don't want to assemble your amp every gig. You want to you want to plug your amp in and it works. It's the same with the pedal board. You don't want to have to assemble this chain of things together. You just want to put it down and turn it on. So my first pedal board was super simple. I think it was just kind of a chorus, a distortion and a delay. And it's not that much different now, to be honest. I mean, I've never really got very complicated with a pedal board. The most pedals I've ever had really is probably 5 or 6. And even that was plenty. 2 or 3 gain stages, a couple of, maybe a delay, and then maybe something like a tremolo and a chorus. I love a chorus. I've always loved the sound of a chorus. It's great. But so my kind of, the biggest departure I made from a standard pedal board was I once bought a TC Electronic Nova system, which is kind of like a multi-FX. But you can also set up presets, and it's got a lot of effects built in, time and space kind of effects and choruses, and it's got boost and overdrive, and that was cool. But since then I've gone back to just having normal pedals. But what's on your board at the moment?
So not too dissimilar to you, mate. I mean, I was always very simplistic in my setup, particularly in the early years of gigging. It was a Marshall with kind of 2 or 3 channels on the Marshall, depending on which Marshall I was using, and it was a wah pedal on the floor and sometimes a tuner, and that was it, right? and I just relied on the clean crunch and lead tones of the amp. And so I've never been somebody that's massively into loads of layers of effects and loads of different modulation. But my board now is, so I've still got a Marshall amp which I keep for if I'm really wanting to play some kind of full on rock and get that Marshall sound. But by and large now I try to go for as versatile a rig as I can, so that I can create Marshall-esque tones or very kind of clean Fender style tones, and I try to have a more versatile rig that allows me to do that, and I use pedals to help shape that tone. So it'll again depend on what guitar that I'm putting through it, whether it's a humbucker guitar or a single coil guitar. But But generally, at the moment, my kind of main gigging rig will be a single core guitar, like something like a Strat, and about 2 or 3 different overdrive pedals, which I like to kind of gain stage, and we'll talk about that and what that means. And chorus, like you, I always love to have a bit of chorus available, and a delay pedal. A wah pedal is always on there as well. I keep a looper on there, but that's just for kind of home use and practice use, really. But it just out of convenience, there's a looper at the end of the signal chain. I also have got a volume boost pedal on there as well, which I do rather lazily employ for cutting through the mix for solos. But I try to avoid exactly what you described, which is that almost you can hear it click on and you can hear it completely change the sound of the guitar. I try and have it just a very subtle, non-colouring, just slight volume lift, which if I was a bit more competent, I should probably just do from the volume controls on my guitar, because that's all it's really doing. It's just giving a slight push to the sound to help cut through the mix for a solo. But it's a pretty simple board. There's there's about eight or 9 pedals on there, and I switched the drive pedals in and out depending on what the gig is. So I mean, I built my first pedal board based on the kind of John Mayer. I was really into, and still am into, John Mayer as a player, and I wanted to try and replicate some of the sounds that he had, not just because I wanted to play John Mayer songs and sound exactly like John Mayer. That kind of soundscape and some of the tones that he had, I thought actually they will lend themselves really nicely to the band that I'm playing in, or if I'm playing for a function band. It covered a broad range of spectrums, right? So that's that kind of approach to a pedal board and picking pedals in that way was kind of first instigated by looking at his pedal board and actually thinking to myself, that's quite accessible for me, and it makes sense. There's nothing too fancy, there's nothing too complex on that pedal board. It sounds like a really sensible, practical rig. A few different stages of overdrive for your kind of crunch sounds, and then your kind of lead tones, and then some delays in chorus, just to kind of add a little bit of different kind of dynamics to your sound. So yeah, that's what's on my board at the moment, and I don't think that will change massively. I see, and I definitely cover and would love to try out some of these pedal boards that I see on social media, where they're kind of multiple layers of pedals hidden underneath kind of different layers and levels, and then it's all routed to a switching system at the front, and you just go, wow, I wonder what that's like to play through. But I don't know, for me, that's, even though I have a need to shape my tone through pedals, that to me then starts to feel like it's getting in the way of the time that I've got available to play and practice, because I'd just be forever fiddling around with the setup.
Yeah, absolutely. And arguably there's creativity in restriction, isn't there, as well? In sometimes it's good to think about what you can play with less and to be more creative with less than it is to think, well, if I have more pedals and more sounds, then I can be more creative. There's a lot of creativity in that restriction.
I think so too. There's a pedal that's really typified that for me, and we'll talk about it when we get to the types of pedals that we're going to put on this board that we're going to hypothetically build with the audience, right, in this podcast. Yeah, which will probably turn into a 2-parter at the rate that we're going. But yeah, I bought this pedal which you asked me about, and it's a clone of which I've tried a few over the years, but this one has just kind of made me go, oh, Matt's right, you can get away with just like one pedal and an amp and a volume settings on your guitar for a gig, because this pedal just does so much when you back off the guitar and in its touch sensitivity, and I'm blown away by it, and it costs a really reasonable amount of money. So stay listening, audience, if you want to find out what that pedal is and why I'm currently in love with it. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the pedals themselves, right? Actually, I should just say, you just mentioned your board. I'll just quickly talk about my current board, which is super simple. But I do want to add just 2 more things to it. So my board is currently simply, I've got a TC Electronic Ditto looper, which is obviously only for home use. I'm not, I wouldn't use that in a gig situation. Certainly not with a band. Then I go into TC Electronic Spark Boost, the mini boost version, which I've spoken about before on some of the early podcasts. I really love that because it's just a straightforward level boost straight into the front of the amp, and more so in terms of functionality, it's got this great momentary feature feature that allows you to, rather than just click it on and then click it off, if you keep your foot on it, it will come on, but then when you take your foot off, it will go off. So it's quite a nice little kind of ergonomic feature, especially if you're like me, where for a lot of my gigs currently, I dep for wedding bands, and it's often single guitarist. So I'm having to do on some songs, both lead and rhythm duties, and sometimes moving between the two. Classic example being Johnny Be Good. That chorus, you're chugging away at the rhythm and you're doing that little lead line all at the same time. So having something that's as versatile as that's really good. And then other than that, I just have a TC Electronics Sky Surfer reverb pedal, which I just have set to a fairly quiet spring reverb, and I have that in the loop of the amp, which is also a pedal. So I've got the orange Orange Terra Stamp amp pedal, which is a 20-watt amplifier in a pedal format. So I have that on my board. And the reason I chose that is, one, it sounds okay. It's not amazing sound, but it sounds okay. I quite like the sound of the kind of pushed, clean sound, just going into dirty.
Definitely.
It's loud enough for gigging, and it's on my board. It's super lightweight. So what I bought to accompany it is a DV Mark neodymium 12-inch single speaker cabinet, which weighs about 7 kilos. So now I have a super lightweight rig. So that the main reason my board and setup is the way it is at the moment is just for convenience, really, that I can get a decent sound out of it. But what I want to add to it is another gain stage, because I want to get a better overdriven sound than the amp gives me, and then I can have the overdrive as kind of my thicker distortion sound, and I can use the TC Electronics Spark Boost to boost volume for solos, and I want to add another delay into the loop so that I've got reverb and delay. I kind of like time and space effects more than I like modulation, like tremolo and things like that. I like the sound of a room. I like the sound of being in a space. I think that's more moving than modulation effects. So,
do you think adding in that additional overdrive pedal will then get you to a point where you go, okay, this sounds really good now? Because you described it as saying it sounds okay. I mean, I can't imagine anything that you will play through will just sound okay. I'm sure it'll sound fantastic, but I guess what you're doing is comparing it to other rigs and other amps and things that you've had, where you're kind of thinking, okay, well, this is now a more convenient rig and setup for me, and versus other things that I've had in the past, it sounds okay. But you're trying to get a little bit more out of it now.
Exactly, yeah. So it is a great sounding amp often by itself, but it doesn't do everything that I want my rig to do. There are some, its high gain sounds are fantastic. Its low to mid gain sounds are fantastic, but that kind of creamy, kind of almost fusiony sounding guitar, sound isn't in it. If you think of kind of like a Dumble-esque, overdrive, you think of kind of like somebody like Robin Ford, who plays, and he's got a very smooth lead sound that's not a high gain, it's not low gain, it's just smooth, punchy, kind of immediate sounding. It doesn't have that sound in it. And I think, obviously I'm going to have to get that from a pedal, which is fine. I also have another idea for that for maybe a few years down the line, but we'll talk about that in switching later on.
All right, cool. So I'll tell you what's on my board then. So I've got so my amp is a Blues Deluxe reissue, which is it's a 1x12, I think. Yeah, it's a 1x12. I've upgraded the speaker in it. I think the Blues Deluxe reissue by Fender is an absolute cracking amp. It's 40 watts, all valve, 2-channel. The clean channel on it is epic. One of the things that was always commented on this amp is that the Eminent speaker, the stock Eminent speaker in it, is a little bit harsh on the top end, and I certainly found that it's a really lovely amp, but at certain volumes and in certain rooms when you're gigging it, you can feel almost slightly ice picky kind of treble every now and again with the amp. So really simple mod is I changed out the speaker, and I put in the Cannabis Rex speaker, which there's loads of stuff, you can Google it on YouTube or whatever, but that for me sounded like the right combination with that amp, and I must say it absolutely transformed the amp. The low end is incredible now, and that harsh top end that was there occasionally has completely been smoothed out. It's brilliant. So in terms of amp, I'm absolutely delighted. It's the right size for me. It's not too heavy, considering at one point I was lugging around 4x12s or kind of 2x12s and things. This is like much more convenient. It fits in the boot of the car really well, but it's a Fender all valve 40 watt amp, so there is so much headroom when you need volume. But on the board then, to kind of shape the tone, I go from I've got a Line 6 wireless kit, like the G50, I think it is, wireless kit. It's the all metal one, so it definitely stands kind of some gigging pressure. And I've got a Polytune, little mini Polytune tuner, which I think is brilliant. It's one of those ones where actually you can obviously tune the individual strings, and it'll tell you know, how sharp or flat you are, but it also enables you to strum all 6 strings in one go, and it will then come up with a readout that tells you where each of those 6 strings is relative to kind of
that's cool, isn't it?
And it works, and it actually does work. It does work. And then I've got 3 different gain stages. At the moment, there is the first kind of always on pedal is this mystery pedal that I'm gonna tell you about later, but it is a clone. And then into a blues driver, and then I've got the Super Badass by MXR as the kind of most aggressive distortion, and that's to give me some almost kind of like harder rock Marshall kind of type tones from this setup, and it works really well. And then I've got a bunch of Moore mini pedals, which I think are really, really great for the sound quality and price balance. So Moore, MOOER, really well made, all metal casing, and I've got a kind of delay chorus and a clean boost there as well. And I've also just bought the mini reverb pedal that Moore make as well. So yeah, there's a whole little kind of Moore set of pedals going on there, which is great. And then the Ditto Looper at the end. So again, a mixture of some more, expensive pedals, but also some really affordable that have served me really well and haven't broken down at all. But then I've got a bunch of other pedals across the other side of the room, which kind of go in and out. So there's like a TS-808 Tube Screamer. There's the Love Pedal Super 6 Stevie mod, which I've spoken about before, which is a brilliant pedal. The Proco Rat reissue pedal, phenomenal distortion pedal, absolutely superb pedal. Really, really fond of that. There's the Soul Food by Electro Harmonics, again, is another clone type pedal, and then the Bayang 80 OD8, which we've spoken about before. Yeah. So all of those that I've mentioned that are not on the board at the moment are just different drive pedals and overdrive pedals, and anyone that's got into kind of pedal board and messing around with pedal boards invariably has an addiction to buying drive pedals, and I'm no different. So yeah, you kind of swap in those different drive pedals to create the combinations of crunch and lead tones and things that you want.
So sorry to interrupt this super interesting conversation. However, if you've made it this far, you should probably subscribe to the Guitar Smarts podcast. You can do that in your favourite podcast app. Go and do that now, and then come back to the show. Let's get back to it. Cool, man. So this is these. I mentioned earlier on there are 5 main areas of consideration if you're building a board or taking what you have and turning it into a pedal board. And the first one is the pedals themselves, right? So we've just discussed the pedals that we have. It's important, I think, to do that first before you actually turn it into a board. I think you should have your sound and your setup considered and decide upon it first. You should get the pedals that you like, try the ones out that you want to try out, and build a rig on the floor that you like, that's got all the effects in the order that you want, and before you then move on to putting things onto a board. So when you were building your pedal board, did you experiment with your signal chain, with positions of things?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And that was on your advice
yes.
as well, and through reading some of the articles, because I must admit, having come from a background of kind of floor-based multi-effects units, you don't have to take that into consideration, the actual sequence of pedals. I mean, with some of the Line 6 stuff, they kind of teach you the theory of where those different modulation effects and space effects should sit relative to distortion pedals and things like that, and if you're creating a series of patches and things. But you've really got to think about that when you're putting together a physical signal chain of pedals. So yeah, you definitely helped advise me on that. So the first thing was considering the kind of overdrive pedals, and there is no kind of right or wrong with it. There's some theory and there's some different principles to follow. I mean, we've mentioned gain staging, and there's 2 kind of theories with this. Some people prefer to put the higher gain stuff first, and then kind of in the signal chain in terms of order of what the guitar sees first, and then what comes out of the board that the amp then sees. They prefer to put the higher gain pedals first, and then kind of further towards cleaner sounds.
Yeah.
I prefer gain staging the other way, which is I like to have a kind of sometimes always on, but that kind of just pushed amp sound as my first pedal, and then that goes into the next kind of layer of gain, which would probably be something like a tube screamer type sound, and then that in turn then runs into the kind of the most dirtiest or distorted sound that I'll have at the end before I then start to go into my other effect in the signal chain. So, and in that way, I've found it quite nice to be able to run different combinations of overdrives, from those 3 drive pedals, playing around with, having 1 and 3 on, or 2 and 3 on, or just kind of, building the gain with different combinations of those pedals, with kind of what we're talking about when we're saying gain staging and the order that you put them in. But to your point, playing around with those pedals and the order of them and figuring out how they interplay with each other as well as on their own, even when the other ones are off, can have an impact, again, based on if there's a buffer in one of the pedals versus it being true bypass or what have you. So I think the best thing to do, exactly as you said, Matt, is before you start, strapping everything down to a board, put everything out on the floor, try out the different configurations, read up on some of the theory around which order effect should go in and which ones you can kind of play around with the order. And we'll go into a little bit of that on this podcast, some of the general principles. But get all of that kind of figured out while you've not got the board and sticking it down to kind of worry about. And then once you've got a good feel for how you would like it to all then kind of flow in terms of signal chain, then you can start to kind of think about how to get it on the board and what size board you're going to need and where you're going to need to run power supplies from and all of that kind of shenanigans. Because changing the order of pedals and things like that, it becomes a lot more faff once you've already stuck it all down onto a board.
Exactly. So it's important to do that first. And gain staging is such an important part of the sound. I think it's the most important thing to get right on a board is the order of your gain type pedals, because they react so differently depending on where they are with each other, So for example, let's say you have a volume boost type pedal, like just a clean boost, and you have that purely as a volume boost to push more. And let's say you have something that's like a rat, like your Procore rat, that's got a really distinct high gain sound, and you might use that for that very specific sound. So if you have your clean boost after that, it's going to act like a master volume. It's going to act like you're turning up the volume on the pedal. The sound of the pedal isn't going to change. If it's a true clean boost, that is, where it's not actually affecting the sound, it is literally just a volume change. Whereas if you have the clean boost before the pedal, then you're driving your guitar sound into the pedal more, and you won't notice as much of a volume increase because of the compression that's happening in the rat, but you'll notice a gain increase because now you're driving more signal into it, and therefore it's distorting more. So that's really important. If you're wondering why doesn't my sound get louder when I click this clean boost into my rat or something, maybe you need to swap them over, and then the clean boost will give you volume but no extra gain.
And that's how I did it. Yeah. That was your advice when I did it, and I said, look, I still want to be able to have a almost like a master volume on the board to just push for solos. And I remember you saying, right, get the interplay with your different gain pedals in the right order and how you want to do that, and experiment with how they sound. But make sure then, if you want that boost, put your clean volume boost pedal after all of that gain staging. So it's boosting everything after your most saturated lead tone. So yeah, that's how I did it, which works really nicely. It's just like a little master volume pedal on the board.
And that's how I have mine set up. So I have the clean boost kind of at the end of the gain. Well, it's the only gain I have at the moment, but whenever I've had more distortion or more dynamics based pedals like that, it's always been the clean boost is at the end. It might not necessarily go from heaviest to cleanest, but the clean boost, whichever is meant to be there just to give more volume, is always at the end. And then we move into kind of modulation effects and reverb effects. Now a lot of people think your time effects should go in the loop. And what that means is, if you look at your guitar amplifier, any guitar amplifier is a mixture of two things. It's a preamp and it's a power amp. And the preamp is where you affect your sound, where you add gain or your EQ. And then what comes out of that goes into the power amp, and that's the section that converts it into a speaker level signal. A lot of amplifiers now have an effects loop, which is basically just it's a link into, so it sends the output of that preamp through a loop where you can add pedals, and then you can go back into the power amp. So it means you can add effects that don't change the sound of the preamp, and you can then just add effects to the finished signal before it hits the speaker.
Cool.
So a lot of people prefer to put a kind of time and space-based effects like reverb or delays and echoes and things into the loop. Some people like to put them into the front of the amp. Again, something to try out, something to see what you prefer. Inevitably, if you're putting time-based effects or anything else into the loop, that's more cabling. So, it does make the rig more complicated. But I would say I tend to stick to just the usual of distortion and gain-based effects into modulation-based effects. Modulation being things like chorus, tremolo, phasers, all that kind of stuff, and then into time-based effects. And I generally just like everything going through the front of the amp, unless it's reverb. And reverb I do like in a loop if my amp hasn't got reverb, because if you've got the reverb before the front end, then if you hit a distortion or a drive pedal, you're going to also end up boosting the reverb, and you might end up with everything sounding too spacey. Whereas if you have your reverb in the loop, the reverb remains consistent even if you change the sound of what's going into your preamp.
Okay, that's cool. I hadn't fully appreciated that. With reverb, because I've generally always used the reverb built in with amps, but I have just put a reverb pedal on my board, and it's quite nice. I've put it right at the end of the signal change. It's kind of one of the last things before the loop, and it sounds okay. It sounds decent, but I haven't experimented it with it in the actual effects loop. So I'll do that and see if I get a better result. I remember talking to you about the use of the effects loop for some of those modulation effects and kind of time and space effects when I was setting up the board, and we kind of talked through the theory of it, and the theory that it is supposed to sound better and give a much truer sound of those effects if they're run in the loop rather than being affected by all of the different distortion pedals and things. I mean, clearly, if they are going to go outside of the loop and just be part of the signal chain, they need to go right at the end of the after all of your distortion. But I tried it both ways. I tried it in the front of the amp, and I tried it in the effects loop, and I didn't notice a huge difference if I'm honest. Now, it may just be the types of pedals that I was using or just the way the board was set up, but to me it didn't justify, even if it did sound slightly better, it didn't justify the additional cabling runs that would be needed to run from the effects send and return loop, which if you're in a gigging situation, right, and you've got your board in front of you at the front of the stage and your amp somewhere at the back of the stage, even if you're not playing on the biggest stage in the world, that's still another 20-30 foot of cabling run between your board and the amp for potential signal loss and things. And it just ended up with too many cables, so I didn't go down that route. But it's definitely worth playing with, for sure.
Definitely. I think experiment, I think it's good to understand what the conventions are and why we have certain things in certain orders, but experiment. You might find that you like going straight into a chorus, or you might like going straight into a delay effect before everything else. If that's the sound you're going for, I think it's important to experiment. One thing to point out, if you are the kind of person that likes the sound of a classic fuzz pedal, like a fuzz face type thing, that is a very old design of circuit. They use very old technology that actually they like to see a particular type of signal. If you've got a fuzz face, something to try out. Let's say you've got a fuzz face and a Boss blues driver. Go straight into your fuzz face, play. You'll love it. You'll like the sound of it. Then try swapping it so that you go into a blues driver or something similar, and then into your fuzz face, and you'll notice whenever you step on the fuzz face sound awful. There's a reason for that. So some of those old type of distortion effects that use germanium and silicon transistors for their sounds, they work based off a very specific signal, which is the impedance that you get from a guitar. So they drive that pedal in a particular way. If you go into something like a Boss blues driver or any kind of buffered pedal that isn't true bypass when it's off, then the pedal, the fuzz face or that germanium or silicon type pedal doesn't see that same impedance from the guitar. It'll see something completely different, and it'll sound and react completely.
It will see the pedal before it rather than the guitar.
And it'll respond entirely differently. Most modern pedals now have have circuitry that account for that, so that even if you're going straight from a guitar or from another pedal, it'll work correctly anyway. So that's something to consider if you've got like a fuzz face, or you've made your own fuzz face, or because they're quite simple to make. You should probably put that first, regardless of what else you've got in your chain.
So fuzz bass pedals like that have germanium kind of circuitry within it. Put those first is what you're.
Yeah, exactly. You might find if you've got something like a fuzz face, or even like an Electro Harmonix big muff, that kind of thing, that have got silicon or germanium circuitry without the technology that kind of solves that problem for you. You'll probably find they don't sound right unless they're the first pedal in the chain.
Got you.
So that's something you should remember as well. So we've got.
What about? Sorry, mate. I was just going to say, what about tuners and wah pedals? Do you have a view on where those should be placed in the signal chain?
Tuner, I think, is. I'd actually say that's dependent on the type of music you play. If you're in like a metal band and you've got a lot of high gain stuff going on, it's probably good to have it at the end of your signal chain, your tuner, so that it mutes all the noise coming from any pedals that you've got. Otherwise, it's good to have it just at the beginning of the chain, so that it mutes anything going through the pedals whilst you're tuning. It doesn't really matter, because your tuner's going to mute your signal anyway. I actually don't have a tuner pedal. I'm quite happy to just use a headstock based thing, like like the TC clip-on, or even like a snark kind of thing. I'm happy with those, and it gives me more room on the board. And also, actually, there are some pedals out there that one of the pedals I had in the last couple of years to give me some more kind of modulation options. I had the Line 6 M5, which is just a single stomp box, but it's got a load of the Line 6 sounds in, but it's got a built-in tuner, so I had that as my tuner as well. So I could just hold my foot down on the bypass button, and then the tuner would come on, it would mute everything. So it saved me having to have a dedicated tuner pedal on the board, because I'm kind of like I want the most for my money, right? And a tuner's doing the exact opposite of making a sound, which is what I want a pedal to do. So I've always kind of like resented having a tuner on my board. It sounds stupid, doesn't it? There's
like a lot of the stuff we're mentioning, right? It's individual, and that's the great thing about building pedal boards. It's you customize it to what you like and what you want, and I love that. For me, I wouldn't ever take that tuner off of my board. I love it, because I'm just a nightmare for changing batteries and stuff, right? And so none of my pedals run on batteries for a start. It was all powered up, right? And I've got like 2 or 3 of those little snark type headstock tuners, which are brilliant, and they live at home, and I use them all the time for guitar setups and things like that. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah. But I just know that when I go out to a gig, and if that's in the gig bag, the battery's going to be flat on it. It's going to just, I won't have changed the battery. I won't have kept a spare. And so just to have a little it's a tiny little thing, polytune on my board, that's just one less thing. And I'm one of those people that, even though I know I've set my guitars up nicely and they stay in tune, but I just still like to check the tuning like periodically throughout the gig, and just having it on the board, I can do that. Yeah,
that's a good habit. That's a good habit to check your tuning regularly throughout a gig. You should do that, actually. If you're listening and you're a gigging guitarist, you should check your tuning throughout a gig regularly. Every few songs, just double check it. And that's actually, you're making a good argument there for the polytune, aren't you? Which is, we're not sponsored, but that's a good thing to have a polytune for. Stamp on it, strum your strings. It'll show you every string's tuning, not just, you don't have to go through it one by one. And if you see a nice big green smile, upside down smile, you're in tune for the next song. So that's a good point. It's a good argument for having a pedal. I should maybe do that.
Right, horses for courses, absolutely.
Exactly.
I do get what you're saying, and you like to go out with a fairly minimalist rig and minimalist board. So for you, space on the board is going to be premium, right? So if you don't feel you need a tuner on the board, then you don't need it. And sorry, I was also going to ask you about wah pedals as well. Is there a theory as to where the wah pedal should go? I always thought it was one of the first things that the guitar should see.
One of the first things, again, is the convention. Again, it depends on the sound that you're after. There is a difference between putting a wah before and after gain pedals, because a wah is a filter. It's something that it's kind of it's a low to high pass adjustable filter. Really, as you've got it in its heel position, it's a low pass filter. So it's letting all the low frequencies through, and it's cutting out things in the top. And then as you move it forward to the toe position, it's moving that filter, that kind of chunk it takes out of the sound from the low up to the high. From the high up to the low, so that it's letting through all the high frequencies. And as you move it, it kind of makes that, whirring sound. So if you do that straight out of your guitar, it's going to feed that filtered signal into your gain stages, and your gain pedals are going to then effectively be, they're only distorting those frequencies that are coming through. Whereas if you put your wah pedal afterwards, then your guitar is going to be hitting the gain pedals, and you're going to get a different gain sound because you're now hitting the gain with all your guitar signal. And then your wah pedal is going to be filtering out everything that comes out of your gain pedal. So you're just changing the sound. They will sound different doing it one way or the other because you're feeding different things into each pedal.
Right.
So it depends. You might actually try a wah pedal after your gain pedals and go, actually, I really like the sound of that. It's a little bit more kind of funky, a little bit more weird, because you're kind of doing things differently. But try out what you prefer.
Good advice. I think that's one way where you can play around with it. I've had my head in a wah pedal this week repairing it for a customer. That was fun. Yeah, that's a story for another day. But yeah.
It's not an exact science putting pedals in order, but it does help to understand kind of almost on a scientific level what your pedal is doing, because you can logically then think, well, where should it then go based on it? Like, for example, a tremolo. If you've got a trem pedal, that should kind of go where your modulation effects are. But if you use a lot of time-based effects, and if you use a lot of delays for your sounds, maybe you've got a lot of ping-pong delays, I think it helps to try out putting your tremolo after your delay, because you don't want this tremolo sound going into a delay and then all those different pulses that happen from your tremolo getting mixed up in the tails from your delay. You then lose the effect of the tremolo because the delay kind of evens it out as those repeats happen. Whereas if you put the tremolo after, then that pulsing effect happens consistently regardless of the repeats that you get from your delay. So again, it's a different sound. So it depends on what's important to you from a sound perspective. But you can really change things drastically by understanding what is it that this pedal's actually doing. And then you can think, well, actually, then if I understand that properly, I should be able to do this sound if I do things slightly different. So try and understand really what it is your pedals do. I think that is key to coming up with the right combination and signal chain. So that's kind of, I think we've covered the first section, though, which is the pedals themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And what order to try and put them in, and where you can experiment with the order of those, and where you perhaps should stick to the kind of traditional kind of part of where they fit in a signal chain to get the best result, particularly with something like some of the modulation and delay pedals, and indeed some of the kind of fuzz. So yeah, some good basic advice there now. And cool. we've played around with them on the floor with the cabling and moved things in and around before we've even considered putting them on a board.
Well, that was another super fun conversation. I really hope you enjoyed it. Remember to come over to our social media pages, tell us what you think, ask us some questions, come and say hello, anything at all, share some information with us, give us ideas for podcasts that you'd like to hear and subjects that you'd like to hear us talk about in the future. And brilliant. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll speak to you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.